Hello, everyone. I'm Unishang Simpson. I hope you can all hear me. I'm truly delighted to welcome you all on behalf of AFAS to the first of what we hope will be a series of conversations between African law students and some brilliant African arbitration practitioners along the lines of a fireside chat. Firstly, a bit about AFAS. AFAS stands for the Arbitration Fund for African Students. It's a registered charitable incorporated organization under the laws of England and Wales. I am one of the trustees of AFAS, and our primary objective is to advance education in arbitration through knowledge creation, through skills development and research in the use and methods of arbitration, particularly for African students. What we do is we support African students to attend conferences, moots, and other arbitration-related events. We also encourage African students to undertake research, and we publish and communicate their output to the public via our social media channels. Now, in this way, we aim to support the emergence of the future generations of African arbitration practitioners and academics. You will find a link to our website in the chat, so please explore that and find us on LinkedIn as well. We'd love to connect with you. So that is why we're so thrilled to partner with Africa in the Moot and the Africa Arbitration Academy in this project. Today we have 4 law students from Strathmore University who will be in conversation with 2 of the shining stars in the constellation of Africa's Most Promising Arbitration Practitioners 2022, as awarded by the Africa Arbitration Academy. It is our aim that this will become a regular event on the AFAS calendar as we showcase the extraordinary talent that we have, both in terms of our law students and arbitration practitioners on the African continent. Next, you will hear from Dr. Abayomi Okubute and Erin Kronye, our valued partners in this endeavor. They'll tell you a bit more about their respective organizations. Abayomi is the Executive Director of the Africa Arbitration Academy. He's also the arbitration partner at Pensbury Attorneys and Solicitors in Nigeria and a professor of international business law at Yorkville University in Canada. Erin is a South African attorney, currently practicing in international arbitration as De Bro Blackstone Westbrook in Amsterdam. She's also the Europe representative of the African Arbitration Association Young Members Committee and a director of Africa in the Moot. Unfortunately, I have to leave for another meeting, but I know you're in for a treat, and I look forward to watching the recording. My fellow trustee, Tabitha Munyaka, will deliver the closing remarks on behalf of AFAS. Thank you very much. The floor is yours now, Bayomi.
Thank you very much, Eunice. I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you, Eunice, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you are. My name is Abayomi Okubute, and I'm the Executive Director of the Africa Arbitration Academy. The Academy is extremely delighted to support the inaugural session of the AFAS Conversation Series in collaboration with Africa in the Moot. The series, we understand, allows the Academy's 30 most promising arbitration practitioners in Africa to engage with future practitioners and leaders. And it's exciting to see aspiring minds enthusiastic about delving into the world of arbitration and having the opportunity to relate with rising stars or leaders of arbitration practice in their different countries. Just some words about the Africa Arbitration Academy for those that are not familiar with our programs. The Academy was established in 2019 due to the rising demand for improved expertise and training of arbitration practitioners in Africa, and to expose African practitioners to the current trends and development in international arbitration. We have established 2 award-winning capacity building initiatives. First is the flagship training program, which is held in London during summer in June. And that program is taught by international arbitration experts, academics and practitioners, heads of arbitration institutions, in-house counsel, and judges. And the overall objective of the flagship training program is to provide the much needed specialized training to arbitration practitioners from Africa and to equip them with the right skills to succeed within the international arbitration community. Second, capacity building program is the executive training program for in-house counsel and state representatives on investment arbitration that we organize with the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, ICSID. And the next edition of this special program is scheduled for spring 2024, next year. And the program will be hosted by the World Bank in Washington, D.C., United States. And apart from the capacity building initiatives, the Academy has also been at the forefront of development of interest to Africa, and is always keen on leading the way to innovation and developing the practice of international arbitration within the continent. We have launched several award-winning projects, including the Africa Arbitration Academy Protocol on Virtual Hearings in Africa, the Survey on Cost and Dispute Funding in Africa, and the Africa Arbitration Academy Model Bilateral Investment Treaty for African States. Another important project is the 30 Most Promising Arbitration Practitioners List and Award, which recognizes top practitioners in different African countries doing great work, handling market-defining disputes, and contributing to the development of arbitration practice in their different countries. So we have two of the star-rated awardees as our speakers today. Both of them are my very good friend, and I'm sure you will enjoy hearing from them today and having the opportunity to learn and expand your horizons. So I encourage all of you to embrace this experience wholeheartedly, whether you are a seasoned participant or a new person to the field or in the field. This event is a platform to challenge ourselves, connect the present with the future, and most importantly, learn from each other. I will now yield to Irene to introduce Africa in the Moot and wish you all a great time ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Okobote. On behalf of Africa in the Moot, I extend a huge thanks to the Arbitration Fund for African Students and to the Africa Arbitration Academy. It is an immense privilege for our initiative, which we internally call Modest but Mighty, to stand alongside both of these fine institutions and all of the individuals that also in turn support them. So Africa in the Moot is a non-profit volunteer-based organization which supports sub-Saharan African teams to participate in the Willem C. Vis International Commercial Arbitration Moot. It's a mouthful, but the Vis Moot, as it's more colloquially known, is the largest commercial moot court in the world and typically draws hundreds of university teams from around the world to compete. But historically, sub-Saharan Africans' participation in that has been less than 1%. So we at Africa in the Moot say that that is not good enough. And knowing that the raw talent is there on our beloved continent, but perhaps the resources and the awareness and opportunities are not, we as an initiative support teams with coaching, training, funding, and access to resources, together with our very valuable partners, so that they can best participate in the 8-month Vis Moot journey. And ultimately, that also includes participation at in-person events. So through our mission, we really prioritize education and training, but network and exposure, and very, very importantly, our global community. And in just 2 years, we are very, very proud to have increased sub-Saharan African participation by over 300% in the Vis Moot. And in fact, in this year, in April, at the 30th Vis Moot, we broke the record with 10 teams on the ground in Vienna. And this is the largest group of, or largest cohort of sub-Saharan African teams to reach Vienna ever. So we are also very, very proud to have been recognized and won a Global Arbitration Review Award earlier this year for Best Innovation. And in particular, that Best Innovation was recognized as our East Africa Vis Pre-Moot, which is the only in-person Vis Pre-Moot that happens in person in sub-Saharan Africa, and that takes place in Nairobi. We will soon enjoy the third rendition of that in February in the coming year. We are also very, very humbled to have been recently recognized for an African Arbitration Award, and that is for innovation in arbitration as well. So while our mission is to promote diversity and equal representation and inclusion of Africans in the Moot, as the Moot mirrors international practice, we also want to promote diversity in international legal practice as well. But through the Moot, and importantly beyond the Moot, we also seek, as part of our mission, to promote sustainable capacity building from the ground up, so to speak. So from that basis, we believe that talented future African practitioners can gain exposure and a valuable network and legal skills to continuously develop in the next steps in their careers. And with that, we are really, truly delighted to connect two generations of African practitioners today in this series, that is the present and the future, and to build that bridge to further enhance the globalization and inclusion of international and African arbitration. So please do contact us if you would like to hear more and be more involved. We would really love to have your support because the community makes everything possible. We will include some links to all of the organizations in the chat as well. But now I will stop talking and hand over to the actual stars of our show, of whom we are incredibly proud, and that is the fantastic group of representatives from Strathmore University in Nairobi, Kenya. So over to you, Irene and co.
Thank you very much, Erin. We're super excited for this session, and we will jump right in by introducing ourselves before we introduce our wonderful speakers today. I am Irene Muhoro. I am currently a member of Africa and the Moot's Media Committee. I am also a current assistant coach for Strathmore's Vismoot team. I myself did the Vismoot 2 years ago and have had the privilege of being on the coaching team ever since. When I am not doing either of those things, I am currently qualifying to practice as an advocate in Kenya and will be starting an attachment style training come January of 2024. I have the distinct pleasure today of being joined by a student that I have coached and two students that I'm currently coaching, so I will let them go ahead and introduce themselves.
Thank you so much, Irene. My name is Aasim Aslam. I'm currently a fourth-year law student at Strathmore University. I'm originally from Mombasa, Kenya, a beautiful coastal city that I hope you'll all visit one day. And yeah, that's it. I'll actually yield the floor to Cynthia.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Cynthia Shem. I am participating in the 31st Vismoot. So I am in the current team, and we have the pleasure of being coached by Irene and also our other alumni, who is Aasim, who really comes in to help. So outside school, I'm mostly occupied with Vis at the moment. So ask me that question next day after March. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Tabitha Munyaka. I'm currently in the 31st Vismoot, representing Strathmore University. I moot alongside Cynthia, and Irene is one of our coaches, so I'm delighted to be here. In my free time, I like reading books, so I'm glad to be here and to have a fruitful conversation. Without further ado, I would actually dive into today's session by introducing none other but Nania Owusu-Ankomah, who is Nani is a litigation and arbitration practitioner and regularly advises and represents clients in a range of high-value litigation and arbitration disputes. She's also sits as an arbitrator, so she's well qualified to have a conversation with us today about arbitration. She's also a court member of the LCI, which is the London Court of International Arbitration, and the president of the LCIA Africa Users Council. She's also a member of the ICC Commission on Arbitration and ADR, and is chair of the Ghana Charter of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. She was co-chair of the Africa Arbitration Group of the IBA Arbitration Committee, after previously serving as the editor of the IBA Arbitration Committee's newsletter. Nania has also been recognized by Who's Who Legal as a recommended lawyer for Ghana for 2024, and was recognized as a future leader in arbitration in its Global Guide 2023, actually last month. She also has been recognized as one of Africa's 30 most promising arbitration practitioners in 2022 by the African Arbitration Academy, as well as one of the Africa's 50 most promising arbitration practitioners back in 2020. She's also a lecturer in alternative dispute resolution at the Ghana School of Law, and is called to the bar in England, Wales, and also in Ghana. So she's more than qualified to be with us today. So welcome, Nania, and feel at home. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tabitha. I will move on to introduce the second speaker. Mr. Isaiah Bozimo is a remarkable gentleman. He is a senior advocate of Nigeria, SAN, and has built a strong reputation in commercial arbitration and dispute resolution, championing its growth in Africa. As the former Delta State Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice, he ushered in forward-thinking legal reforms, including the Delta State Arbitration Law of 2022. He was also instrumental in shaping Nigeria's current Arbitration and Mediation Act. Now a partner at Broderick, Bozimo and Company, Mr. Bozimo leverages his vast experience to represent a diverse clientele from government and state entities to corporations and individuals locally and globally. He has earned respect for effectively resolving both domestic and international commercial disputes. His portfolio is reputable, with involvement in prominent cases: a 1 billion naira claim with Delta State government, a 2 billion claim related to International Trade Center, and a $300 million gas supply dispute under ICC arbitration. Recognized by Who's Who Legal and the African Arbitration Academy, Mr. Bozimo is a chartered arbitrator and a fellow of the Chartered Institution of Arbitrators. He's a panel member for several esteemed arbitration centers, including the Singapore International Arbitration Center, the Arbitration Foundation for Southern Africa, the Lagos Court of Arbitration, and the Kigali International Arbitration Center. His contribution to the field extends to insightful publications. Notably, he has contributed to the SIRAP Guidance Note on Remote Dispute Resolution Proceedings, the Dallas Guide to Arbitration Places, and the New York Convention Guide. Mr. Bozimo remains a driving force in discussions surrounding effective commercial dispute resolution in Africa. Thank you so much, Mr. Bozimo, for taking the time to be here with us today.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
No worries. I think with that, we can delve right into it with the first question. This first question goes to Mr. Bozimo, and it's one of my favorite questions to ask arbitrators, because I get a wide array of very fascinating answers when I ask arbitrators this particular question. And the first question is, I guess, simply why? Why arbitration?
Aasim, great question. Firstly, let me thank the organizers for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while now. So why arbitration? Well, I'll jump right into it because I can pinpoint the moment where I decided I'd like to pursue a career in international arbitration. So I was in law school at the time. This was in 2006, I believe, my last year of law school. And I was doing an attachment program with ALEX. And we were being supervised by Funke Adekoya, a very prominent senior advocate of Nigeria. I made, should I say the mistake, or I had the pleasure of speaking with her, and I told her I'm interested in arbitration, and I would like to be involved in any arbitration work you're doing. So lo and behold, she brings a huge file, drops it on my desk, and says, "Okay, well, read this file and give me an opinion." That was it. Literally, no other guidelines apart from that. So I took the file home with me, read it, and I presumed she wanted an opinion as to what I felt were the strengths and weaknesses of the dispute and what I felt should be the outcome. So started going through it one by one, given what I thought my opinion should be, until I got to the issue of damages, and I had no idea what to say. So I copped out and says, this would be a matter for the tribunal's discretion, or it's a matter for evidence. I thought I was being clever, and I gave her back the opinion. And about 2 days later, she says, well done, but you didn't give an opinion on damages, so I'd like you to redo it and give me a definitive opinion on that. I gave what I felt was the correct answer. And a few weeks later, she came back and says, well, the arbitration in which you gave an opinion, I'd like you to accompany me. So I went and I saw the proceedings going on, and I saw just a first-hand experience of the process. And we had a conversation afterwards, and she was asking me, well, would you change any aspect of your opinion now that you've seen the process? And I told her the only aspect I would change is possibly the allocation of costs and damages. So that was my first real experience of arbitration, and I felt it was a process in which I could thrive. I liked dispute resolution, I still do, very much so, and indeed my first sort of contact with the legal profession was in a dispute resolution firm. But I think that encounter really stoked my interest and wanted me to see and learn a lot more about commercial arbitration.
Okay, from what you've told us, you have from your first experience, it sounds like you were thrown into the deep end of the waters. But also there's something else that Aasim mentioned, that you served as the Attorney General and also the Commissioner for Justice of the Delta State of Nigeria. I think the question would be, how has that experience in public service influenced the work you do currently as an arbitrator? Yes.
Great question again. Thank you very much. So I think the biggest takeaway from that experience was just to know that irrespective of what sphere you're in, if you want to play at the very highest level, if you want to get to the very top of your profession, there is going to be a significant degree of associated discomfort. And I learned that a lot while serving as Attorney General. You go through a lot more discomfort than you do the perks of the job. And you can either view that discomfort as a hindrance to say, oh, why me? Why am I going through this? Or you can look at it as part and parcel of the growth process, in the sense that you actually need to go through this to become a better version of yourself. So, for instance, there was a very difficult case I went through where the state's main account was frozen under garnishee proceedings, and we had to quickly solve through it to know that at the end of the year, it was towards a December, and December is typically the period where, Christmas, a lot of end of year bonuses are going out. So the decision was riding on me to ensure that everyone's going to get paid. And so it was all hands on deck, pretty much trying to anticipate what would go wrong. What do we need to do to ensure we come out of this on top of the process? So it was a difficult experience, but it's an experience I really appreciate having gone through. Why? Because it taught me how to play in easy mode. I like to gamify it like that. I look at different situations. I look at work as a game, right? And you can choose to play either in easy mode or in hard mode. Now, easy mode is you anticipate every single thing that could go wrong. It's like a pre-mortem, right? And so you have a plan, you sort of scope out what the problem is, you scope out how you're going to deal with that problem, and then you anticipate everything that could literally go wrong. And by doing that, you are ready for success, but you are prepared for failure. So when failure happens, and it usually does come, you're not panicking, you have a very clear head, and you deal with it straight away. So if anything, I think going through that sort of experience as Attorney General taught me how to do that. It taught me how to really anticipate, how to embrace discomfort. I got very comfortable with being uncomfortable to the extent that I liked it. I would get up in the morning, and if you are a religious person, you would thank your creator for giving you this problem, because by the time you come out on the other side, you know you're going to be better for it. So that's pretty much it. It taught me how to be better prepared for disputes, how to anticipate failure, and how to deal with it. So easy mode is the main takeaway from my experience as AG.
And what an incredible soundbite, I think, for our audience. It's mostly Africa and the Moot students that are currently going through this experience. Be comfortable being uncomfortable. It's an incredible experience for growth, but it is also quite uncomfortable. And I think that's an amazing piece of advice and a great takeaway. But speaking into transitioning into arbitration, I'm curious about Nania's experience. I mean, like Isaiah, can you pinpoint the exact moment that you knew you wanted to go into arbitration? And what was your channel into arbitration? For many of us on this call, the VisMoot through Africa and the Moot is how we get to know about arbitration, and we make connections and we gain training and practical experience that helps us sort of make the transition into this arena. But what was that for you, and how did you decide that arbitration is where you wanted to be?
Well, thank you very much to the organization for having me here. It's an honor to be here. I've been a student and a young practitioner, and I always look forward to such events. So it really is a pleasure for me to be here. In relation to breaking into arbitration, or coming into international arbitration, my experience was a little similar to Isaiah's. For me, I started out, so I came to Ghana to to qualify as a lawyer in Ghana. I first qualified in England and Wales. I was called to the bar in England and Wales, and then came to Ghana and decided to stay for a while. And the first few cases that I was involved in were all international arbitration matters against the government of Ghana. So it was really, and it was a very busy time for the firm that I joined, and there weren't any hands to help. So it was literally thrown at me as a very young practitioner. I didn't really even have the theoretical knowledge at that time. But I think, it's sink or swim. When you're thrown into the deep end, you sort of have to learn very quickly and, move things along very quickly. And that's how I actually encountered international arbitration. And I had two cases against the government of Ghana. Of course, there was a team. We had a team in London, our firm. It was myself and my senior partner at the time. And I enjoyed it. I think sometimes when you go through really difficult times and you come out the other end still alive, you're thankful, and then you tend to realize what you like and what you don't like. And I realized that I do like arbitration and the principles involved and how things go. And so that's how I decided that I wanted to do international arbitration. But I have to say that the actual steps in getting me into international arbitration beyond handling international arbitration matters within my firm came about, in year 6 or 7 into my practice. That was when I really decided that I'm just going to take a step forward. Instead of just handling matters in-house, I am going to actually try and break into the international arbitration scene. So I won't even use the word break. I think I sort of chipped away into international arbitration practice. The first thing I did was I attended an international arbitration conference. And when I attended the conference, I met so many people. I expanded my network. The next thing was that, I was really privileged. My senior partner was invited to speak about an aspect of arbitration that had come up in one of our arbitration matters. And around that time, there was an Ebola crisis, and he didn't want to go, so he sent me along, and I went. And I spoke at the conference, and then afterwards, a senior practitioner in Nigeria approached me that they were writing a book in arbitration and wanted us to contribute to the Ghana chapter. So I did that. And then all of that came together beautifully, because once I participated in that, I felt maybe I need to expand my knowledge. So I started taking the Chartered Institute of Arbitration courses. And then I went on an international secondment in London through the International Lawyers for Africa. And I went there with a game plan. Essentially, my plan was to get into an international arbitration law firm and study more about international arbitration while I was there. So God being so good, when I finished that, there was an opportunity to speak on a young people's panel about international arbitration. And I was asked to speak on that panel. And from there, things just started happening. So that, it wasn't a break. It was little steps that I took that eventually ended me up there. And then I started having leadership, not leadership positions, but, involvement as an officer of the London Court of International Arbitration. And then it moved on from there. But I think for me as a student, what I would say, because I know most of you are students and you've already started thinking about this. Well, once you are here and you think international arbitration is the thing for you, I think the first thing to do is to build your knowledge. And I mean, I'm saying this because you can attend conferences, you can do all of those things, but at the very core of becoming a successful international arbitration practitioner, I think it's your knowledge that's important. If you don't build your knowledge, and you lose out on understanding the theoretical aspect of international arbitration, it will catch up with you. You will be found out at one time or the other. So it's important to build your knowledge and to build performance currency. And when I say performance currency, it's about being able to perform whenever you are given the opportunity. Little victories will lead you to bigger opportunities and bigger victories. So once you are in Africa in the Moot, take the opportunity. Make sure you do a great job. You never know who is watching. You never know what opportunities you can get from that. And I think beyond that, once you've spent a bit of time building your knowledge, it's also important to join groups. You can't say you're an international arbitration practitioner and be, caved up in your country and no one knows you. Join, interest groups. Most of the organizations out there have something for students. They have student memberships. Most of them are free for students. You can attend seminars. They're free training programs. As a student, you don't have a lot of money, so you want to be selective about some of the things that you attend. But the great thing is that if you are with an organization, for example, the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, there's free student membership. Even other organizations, they don't have a lot of financial obligations on students. So make the best of those opportunities, because you can connect with older practitioners, you can connect with peers, you can start building a network right from now. And imagine, Irene, Islam, all of you are here and you're connecting with Isaiah and I. And if you make good use of that connection, you can do other things from there. So I think every opportunity you get, you should try and network and connect with people. The last thing I'll say is volunteer, just volunteer. If you're looking to getting money out of the things you do or you put in, I'm not sure you're going to get far. Volunteer your time, volunteer your energy, volunteer, to help at conferences. The good thing about that is that you get to participate in the conference, or at least be in the conference room without actually having to pay to attend the conference. You'll be given food and everything. All you probably have to do is a bit of ushering, doing the signing in of delegates, handing out bags and all of that. But it's an important way of actually taking a step into the community. Just last year, we had an international arbitration conference in Ghana, and a lot of my students volunteered their time. And out of that, some of them have gotten virtual internships, some of them have gotten involved with other organizations. So I have to say, volunteering your time to help. And even at conferences, sometimes they need rapporteurs, and you may be able to offer your services. So place yourself in a space where, when you accept these volunteering opportunities, you are able to place yourself in a space where otherwise you would not get access to. You would also be able to get information that otherwise would not be available to you. And you will also be able to build relationships with people that otherwise you would not meet. So these would be my advice to students who are looking into, I don't want to say breaking into international arbitration, but trying to access the profession. I think if you take these steps, it will be helpful.
Wow, thank you so much, Nania. That was very insightful and very beautifully told as well. So you mentioned little victories, and I got excited because I personally like to celebrate. And it drew me into one of your wins, which I believe are the most notable ones. You're a member of the bar in both England and Ghana. So I'm curious, what informed this choice, and what sort of advantages have you seen per se, especially in the arbitration world, with regards to having these two qualifications? Yes.
I can't say that anything informed the choice. It wasn't really a choice. It sort of just happened. I actually came into the law late. I didn't take law as a first degree. I have a first degree in political science and philosophy. I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but at the time in Ghana, I couldn't take law as a first degree at that time. So I took a first degree in political science and philosophy. And by that time, I was in my very early 20s. I was still very adventurous. I didn't want to be at home. And that's why I went to England. Let me be honest. I wanted freedom. I wanted, there was also the intellectual curiosity. I wanted to see how things were out there. I wanted to study in a different environment. And that's why I went to law school in England. But I think it was such a blessing, not really because the knowledge was different, but I think there was a lot of comfort in going into that environment. And at that time, because I was a postgraduate student studying law, I had people from different schools, Oxford, Cambridge, we were all studying the same thing. And what I realized at least was that I went in with an inferiority complex. Within the first month, I realized it really doesn't matter where you come from. You can be great and be in your country and not know it. So I went there thinking, oh, I might be disadvantaged. But then within a month, I realized that actually I'm really good. And it's okay to come into your own and realize that. And I think sometimes when you study, you study on the continent, you may think that you are not getting everything you need, which might be true, but you realize that when you are in the environment, when you have all the books at your disposal, there's no photocopying involved. You have them online. You have a library full of books, and you take advantage of that. You really realize that you actually are an incredible intellectual. So with that, I think that's what it really offered me. And then of course I always wanted to come back to Ghana, not necessarily to practice, but my father is a lawyer, and it was very important for him that I qualify at the Ghanaian bar as well. And then I did that. So that's how being called to England and to the bar in England and Wales and in Ghana happened. But having said that, I think at the very beginning of my career, I felt like I had wasted my time, because by the time I came back to Ghana, I'm the oldest. I have two younger brothers. My brother after me he was a lawyer as well. And I just felt that I had gone roundabout, just to end up at the same place, wasted a lot of my parents' money. But as I progressed in my career, I really realized the value of the network that I had formed when I was in school. I got to meet so many people. I formed bonds with people. And in that, you realize that you start getting work.
I think Nania dropped off the call as we wait for her internet to come back. I think we can continue. I believe the next question is back to Isaiah. So Aasim, please go ahead.
Thank you. Just before Nania dropped off, she said something that really stood out for me. She said that you can be great wherever you're from. And this leads me to my next question. Given that arbitration is now a growing force and we have different people from different countries coming together to solve disputes amicably using arbitration, these cultures are now coming together. And I think I got this firsthand experience myself when I had the opportunity to Moot in Vienna last year. It's a Kenyan team versus a German team with Brazilian arbitrators. And you're like this all these cultures coming together. And it was really exciting. And, it's the way I speak is different from, say, how Tabitha speaks, right? There's this differences in the way we say our words, the way we present ourselves, and these small cultural differences that really matter. So my question is then, how do you believe that a nuanced understanding of these cultural differences enhances the practice of arbitration? And particularly given that you have served in different roles in different arbitrational institutions, how do you use these cultural differences to your advantage?
Aasim, that's a fantastic question. And it's one I have to deal with both in arbitrations and in everyday life. So let me give this analogy. And I really hope my wife isn't watching, because she's involved in this comparison. So we have our little quirks in our relationship. And if we didn't understand what's driving those quirks, we would argue all the time. So let me give you an example. I had this habit, which I never knew existed, of leaving cupboard doors open. I would literally take out my jacket, put it on, and forget to close the door. And she found that really puzzling, right? And she has this quirk where anytime she showers, the entire floor of the bathroom is completely wet, as if someone went swimming. And I just can't understand it. So we had to quickly come to the realization that, okay, we're not doing this to annoy each other. It's just who we are. It's inherent in us, right? So if we didn't understand that, then we would have a disagreement or we would have a misunderstanding. And it's pretty much the same in an arbitration, right? If you get in an arbitration, you are in a 12 to 18 month relationship. And if you don't understand the quirks of each of the players, then you're going to have misunderstandings. For instance, you gave a great example of the difference between how a Kenyan would communicate versus how a German would communicate. Well, in Nigeria, it's the same thing. We were out the other day and we had a friend over from the Netherlands. And we were having this very nice delicacy called pepper soup. And anytime you are in Nigeria, you are very welcome. I will take you to a nice place. But Nigerians have a very funny way of describing food when they like it. They say it is sweet, right? But it's not sweet. It's spicy for a European. They'll say that's not sweet. That just tastes too spicy. But it's the way Nigerians communicate. So understanding these little quirks, these little nuances is absolutely critical. If you're an advocate, for instance, it goes to your advocacy. If I know, for instance, arbitrator A, B, and C are expecting a particular mode of communication, and that might be different from my legal tradition, I would go out of my way to learn that, because I want my point to be perfectly well understood, and I want to ensure that I'm advocating the best position for my client. If I am an arbitrator, again, I would want to know the cultural differences between the parties, because I would want to avoid at all costs any miscommunication that I could read adversely. I'll give you an example. We were involved in an arbitration where I was the sole arbitrator and the parties were from Tanzania, explain to the other members of the tribunal that a particular mode of replying to official correspondence didn't, so let me rewind a little bit. The tribunal was concerned that one of the parties was taking way too long in replying to business correspondence, and that party happened to be a government entity. But Mrs. Adekoya was able to explain that in Nigeria, there is a very convoluted decision-making process when it comes to replying to correspondence. And I saw that firsthand when I was
Isaiah, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we can't hear you. I think there's an issue with your microphone. We're sorting it out in the back channel again. So perhaps if you just mute and unmute, let's try again.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect, yes.
Okay, Where did you lose me? I'm sorry.
You were telling a story about a tribunal and we missed the story itself.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, so the story was that Mrs. Adekoya was part of a tribunal that had to, there was a government party involved, and they were bemused as to the time it took for this particular party to respond to correspondence. And they were ready to draw an inference that this party is quite disrespectful, not respecting the tribunal's authority, not taking the process very seriously. But it took somebody who was familiar with that culture to know that actually the decision-making process in a government institution, particularly in Nigeria, can be very long. So for instance, if communication goes to a director within a ministry, they would have to minute it to perhaps the minister. The minister would have to minute perhaps to the Attorney General for legal advice. The Attorney General might have to minute to the President to give a final approval, and it will come all the way back down. And that process can take a long time. But if you're not familiar with that, like my wife and I in opening the doors and wetting the floor, you are increasing the risk of miscommunication. So cultural sensitivities are really, really crucial from an advocate's perspective in delivering your message clearly. And from the arbitrator's perspective, in understanding the differences between the parties, and also gaining their trust, because you want the parties to trust in the decision you're making. They would be more likely to accept it. So those are, for me, the very important parts of understanding cultural differences and nuances.
Thank you very much. Nania, just to catch you up, I know your internet is not doing you justice today. Would you like to finish your thoughts on, gathering knowledge and your experience studying abroad?
Yes, I think let me just summarize, because I know that I went off at a point in time. I think the point I was trying to communicate was that yes, there was an advantage in going to school in England and Wales, because it opened my network. So I knew more people. I had peers, I had alumni and all of that. My network pool was wide, and therefore I was able to get work and referrals from. But then I think the main point I want to get across from that is that I didn't actually need to go to school in England and Wales to have that. What I learned from this whole process was the importance of building relationships. I think the most important thing is that wherever you are, whoever you meet, you learn how to network and build relationships so that it becomes useful to you in your career. It may not be now, it may be several years into the future, but you need to learn those basic skills of building relationships with people and intentionally building your network to carry you into your career. So that's my takeaway from going to school in England. Is not so much that I went to school there, but how I learned to build relationships to facilitate my career.
Thank you so much for those tips on networking. It certainly is important to our young audience. And just to go back to something Isaiah touched on, he was telling quite hilarious stories about, cultural differences and quirks and nuances that influence arbitration proceedings, especially when they're between parties that are from diverse contexts. And, speaking of arbitration in different contexts, especially in Africa, you've published quite a bit on arbitration in Africa. You've covered topics such as the enforcement of awards under the New York Convention and judicial attitudes in Africa, towards arbitration. And so, Nania, we're curious whether there are any current emerging trends that you find particularly interesting, and any that you're planning on publishing on in the near future.
Well, actually, I would like to steer us away from the technical and the hard bits of international arbitration. I think what is particularly interesting and which our students should take note of is how the continent has become a focus for international arbitration. The emerging trend I have seen is that you have a lot of African talents being poached or moved into international firms. And I'm not talking, there's the first category of African talent that you see where they go for their masters and they are poached by an international firm. They don't come back. They end up staying there. They have a very successful arbitration career. And then we have the other category where they do not travel to go for any type of education, but they are here, sometimes even partners of law firms here, and that talent is exported into an international firm, and they are working on African disputes, and they're doing amazing things. And I think the bottom line here is that you should realize that your location does not matter. What is most important is your talent. If you are talented, if you are good, you can have access to anything you want. And for me, I think that's the most important emerging trend, is the blurring of jurisdictional lines. Really, there are opportunities everywhere. So if you're going into an international arbitration, don't just think of yourself as a Kenyan lawyer or as a Ghanaian lawyer or as a Nigerian lawyer. You should be open and have an international focus. Understand that in any arbitration, you might be working, in Kenya, but with a Paris law firm and and with English solicitors, and you're all working together towards the same goal. You might also end up moving from your Kenyan law firm to an English law firm, mind you, not because you have qualifications in England and Wales, because international arbitration, you don't necessarily have to be qualified in that jurisdiction. You move into an international law firm and you are working there. The opportunities are endless, and I think this emerging trend goes to show how important Africa has become in the international arbitration sphere. Remember that there were a lot of disputes coming out of Africa that were being handled by international lawyers. Now, there's a need for, or there's a consciousness about how important it is to have African practitioners be involved, because they have insights. And that's an amazing position to be in at the moment. The world is virtually your oyster. So, to the students out there, please think big. Remember, as long as you are good, as long as you have the package, you have opportunities out there. And for me, I think that's the emerging trend I want us to focus on. Dream big and go for it, because the world really is your oyster.
I tend to agree with you that Africa is quickly becoming the main focus of arbitration and quickly gaining the momentum that we saw in other Western countries. I think the question I have to Isaiah is how do you perceive the role of African practitioners in shaping the global landscape of arbitration, taking your experience in both Africa as an arbitrator? Yeah.
Tabitha, thank you very much. I agree totally with Nania in her observation that increasingly there is a focus on Africa. And for African practitioners, it's primarily it's a unique position, right? Unique in the sense that we have a comparative advantage as to knowledge of disputes on the continent, knowledge of cultural differences across the continent as well. But Nania is really correct in when she says that really do not think of yourself as a Kenyan lawyer, a Nigerian lawyer, or an African lawyer per se, because if you look at raw data, parties don't care in the sense that when a party wants to appoint counsel, or whether they want to appoint an arbitrator, at least up until recently, they will hardly ask you, oh, is he Nigerian? Or is he Kenyan? Or is she Ugandan? They want two things. They want expertise and they want experience. Now, I recall, I forget the year, pre-COVID certainly, but I was having a conversation with Professor Emilia Oyema, and we were sort of talking about this perception that African practitioners lack expertise and experience, but we didn't have any concrete evidence for this. So we decided to sort of embark on this process of doing an arbitration survey. And I should thank Professor Onyema for really continuing this SOAS Arbitration in Africa survey series. So the first of them was to really gauge this perception as to whether we actually did lack experience and expertise as African practitioners. The answer is we have a lot of experience, we have a lot of expertise. Now, for me, I think we can sort of turn that perception of inexperience, lack of expertise into a positive. It's a bit like emotional alchemy, right? You take this negative and you turn it into your advantage. Well, how do you do that? Well, if there is a perception that the continent doesn't have talent, by the time you are shining, everyone's looking at you. You want a primary example? Dr. Abayomi Okubote, right? Look at what he's done with the African Arbitration Academy. Just by taking the initiative to say, it doesn't matter that I'm Nigerian, it doesn't matter that I'm African, I'm going to play at this global level. He is consistently recognized on an international platform. Look at Nania. Nania is involved in LCIA, involved in CIR. Both of these institutions are not African, but they're recognized that she has something to offer. So I think for us, we have to quickly realize that we are not buying into that perception that we're not good enough, that inferiority complex. I think you have to be really confident in what you do. And to me, it's a question of perception, because whether you think you're capable of doing something or whether you think you're not capable of doing something, you are absolutely correct. So if you think you can do it, you can. But if in your mindset, I'm not sure, you will likely fail. So for me, as African practitioners, you have to first of all realize we're playing on a global stage. So we don't want a situation where, for instance, I remember years ago, I was looking at ICC caseload statistics, and there was this negative correlation between the number of disputes coming out of Africa and the number of African practitioners involved in those disputes. That is to say, it will typically be seated outside of the continent, and it will typically involve lawyers that are not from the continent. And the question then was, well, why aren't African practitioners involved in African disputes? I even think that's the wrong perspective. I would ask, why aren't African practitioners involved in more international disputes with absolutely no connection to the continent? So for instance, take a Brazilian party with a Singaporean party in an arbitration seated in Tokyo. Why can't we be involved in those? And we can, if we establish those building blocks to show and demonstrate that we actually are good at what we're doing. We have the experience and we have the expertise. And I think that's a critical aspect of where we need to start from. So take any negative situation you might perceive, any inferiority complex you might have, but translate that into a positive to say, listen, if I shine on this continent internationally, I am going to be in the spotlight. So I think we are in a unique position. I really commend each of you, the interviewees from Strathmore University, for taking this initiative, because you are expanding your global network and you are showing by what you're doing in terms of the Moot and in terms of organizing these conversation series that you do have competence and you will be noticed for sure.
Well, thank you so much, Isaiah. What a refreshing point of view, honestly. I mean, even for us as the participants in the VIS this year, one of the things I think we anticipate is getting to Vienna and maybe just not being received as openly with other European teams and people across the globe. So it's a very refreshing perspective to hear that any challenge, we can turn it into something positive. So I would like to ask Nania, have you had any experiences with something similar? Have you experienced any challenges or misconceptions that you have encountered, especially while practicing in the field of international arbitration? And how has this affected you? How did you deal with it? And even further, can you give us some context, some background, some unique experiences that, as an African professional in international arbitration, that you have been able to offer? So, what African perspectives perhaps have you been able to bring up in different situations, and that you would like to share with us?
Thank you, Sincere. And I'm going to try to be sincere with my response. I think I will have to say that the first difficulty or challenge was the challenge of perception. When people hear an African name in the international arbitration context, at the time, what I noticed was that they had a perception of what kind of person we will be dealing with. There was a perception of lack of knowledge. I experienced that simply because I realized it's usually, in my first interaction with people, they'll be, oh, so you live in Ghana, you practice in Ghana, okay. And immediately in their mind, they think or expect that there must be some deficiency to your knowledge, or you must be offering substandard service. Then I think the next perception was my age. I haven't communicated my age to anyone, but immediately people see me, they think she looks very young. And, going with that perception of youth, whether I might actually, someone has actually met me and said, you look like you're not any older than 31. I'm like, well, no, I'm actually much, much older. But then I think there's also a perception that goes with youth. People think that when you are young, you are inexperienced. And it doesn't matter, because people don't know your background, they immediately assume that you don't have a lot to offer because you're young. The third thing, I probably shouldn't say this, it might be politically incorrect, but I think that when people see you, when they think you're good looking, they think you must be an airhead somehow, or you must not be that good. And I faced all of these three. And I think the most important thing is demonstrating your knowledge. When people realize that you are knowledgeable, that you are competent, they will respect you. And it's not something that they have a choice. It comes naturally when you engage in a conversation with someone, or you hear someone speaking on a panel, or you're involved in an arbitration with with that person on the other side, or you are in an arbitration and the person is sitting as an arbitrator, and you have that opportunity to experience that person, then those perceptions fall away. So what I can say is that, as an African student, maybe going into the Vismut, you may, I'm not saying you will, but there might be a problem with perception. But remember, it's perception. It's not the truth. And what you have to do is to show yourself, prove yourself, and let people see you for who you are. Of course, if people perceive you as ignorant and maybe not having sufficient knowledge, and you display that, then it's a conclusion that they can, they can draw. But when you are able to rebut that presumption, then you're able to also channel or change their perception of African practitioners. And I have to say, we all have a duty to change that perception. It's experience that they had in the past that builds that perception, and it's experience with us, the up and coming young practitioners, and the senior practitioners as well, who've paved the way, that's changing that perception. So these are the challenges, and I think the only way to defeat that challenge is to have knowledge. And that's why that's the first advice I gave for students, the very first thing is to build your knowledge, because as you are in this journey, you will have opportunities, but it's how you deal with that opportunity that will determine how far you'll go. So all of you, we are all counting on you as the next generation. Don't let us down. Build your knowledge and prime yourself for the opportunity where you get to shine.
Thank you so much for that. I think the takeaway here is that if we can be able to harness the talent that we have, it can be able to stamp over the perception or misperceptions that other people may have about us as young practitioners and upcoming lawyers. That actually leads me to my second question on to Isaiah on what challenges do young practitioners commonly face in international arbitration, and what advice would you give them to be able to navigate these challenges?
Yeah. So without repeating what Nania has said, she's already given a good overview of what challenges you will face. The perception of lack of knowledge, the perception of you are not as deep, and I think was it Sincere who said that when you went to the VIS, you had the feeling as to whether you would be welcome by the other team as much as the European teams would. So these are all the challenges you will encounter. But I really think it's a question of perception. You can look at it either as a challenge to say, oh no, why me? I feel sorry for myself. Or you can say, okay, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. And that is, to me, is the biggest motivation. So, and also you have to realize, do not look at a challenge as a flaw in the system. Look at it as part and parcel of the system. You have to go through it. There is no other way. Right? There's a great book which I recommend to everyone. It's called The Obstacle is the Way. But the idea is that do not look at as an impediment as blocking the way forward. Look at the impediment as part of the way forward. So by the time you go through all these and you succeed, number one, you feel great about yourself, right? You have that affirmation that, do you know what, I actually can do this. And I'm going to keep doing it. And it makes you stand out amongst your peers. And it proves that rather than just saying, oh, I have a passion for international arbitration, I am interested in topic A, B, or C, you are demonstrating it in your words and your actions. And that is the way to progress in this. So I would say embrace the challenges. Like I said before, get really comfortable with being uncomfortable. And as a cheat, if I can call it that, when you are going into these situations, tell yourself, I'm going to play this in easy mode. I'm not going to make things difficult for myself. Easy mode is proper preparation, anticipation of failure points, and correct execution. So again, you are ready to succeed based on your preparation, but when things go wrong, you don't panic. You adapt, you prepare, and you move on. So embrace the challenges. Don't be scared of them. It's part of what you need to go through to grow in this profession. And never waste the experiences you learn from a good crisis. You will use it in other situations to improve yourself and improve the service you are given to your client, which is the main thing. So welcome the challenges. I love challenges.
Certainly, we definitely agree that challenges are part of our journeys. I'm sure, after this call, if you have a few minutes, Aasim and I could tell you part of our horror stories and the challenges that we experienced in our Moot journeys that Tabitha and Sincere are collecting along their own journeys. But Nania, I'm curious about, when those challenges result in failures, are there failures that you've experienced that at the time seemed insurmountable and like you couldn't get past them? And how did you move on from those failures? And how did you get to where you are in your career?
Well, I think very early on in my I wouldn't even say international arbitration practice. I had just, come, being called to the bar. And as I said, I when I came to Ghana to qualify in Ghana, I was thrown into the deep end. And in that, in one of the arbitrations, there was a procedural point that we could have taken that we did not take. And just looking back and thinking about that, I mean, that was such a strong point that would have really ended the arbitration early, but we didn't take that point. And that for me, it wasn't until later on that I realized and it hit me. And I think it's one of those things. I literally have nightmares about that. But I'm lucky because it was very early on in my career, but it taught me a lesson. I mean, because of that experience, that particular point is not a point I'll miss in any arbitration. And I think that's how you move and grow. You can't expect to have a smooth ride, but what you can do is ensure that no failure goes wasted, because you learn from that failure, and it channels your energy, and it helps you in the next arbitration that you are involved in. I like to say that sometimes, I mean, as lawyers, we are taught to be perfect, and we are very self-critical, but I think it's okay to be self-critical if you don't miss the lesson. The real failure is where you miss the lesson from the perceived failure. And as you're going for the Vismut, and as you are involved in this, you will realize that you will make certain mistakes. You will get some feedback that you won't necessarily like. You may get some feedback that you disagree with. But I think the most important thing, and you may say something or you may freeze at a point in time and you think it's so embarrassing you can't go back. But at the end of the day, I think it's not, learning that learning is part of the journey. Don't go into your profession thinking, I know, and therefore I must perform. Go thinking that I must perform, but I'm also here to learn. And I think that's how you're really able to, get over challenging situations and become a better lawyer.
Thank you so much, Nania and Isaiah, for those lessons that I'm sure everybody, I mean, we all learn a lot from failure than we do from success. I think two things that really stood out for me is that one, to make sure that no failure is wasted because it's an opportunity to learn, and second, to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think that one really stood out to me. But I guess moving on now to a more happy conversation, Mr. Bozimo, you have had quite a remarkable career. And I guess my question is twofold. The first is, what achievement stood out for you? Which achievement of yours from the numerous that you've had is the one that you hold, I guess, dearest to you? And my second one is, for us young and upcoming practitioners and those who want to be as successful as you, what steps have you taken to distinguish yourself from other arbitrators and other lawyers?
Aasim, I wish I could say I like that question. I can't pick. What would I mean, there was something Nania said that we tend to be self-critical. And that really, that applies to me sometimes, in the sense that I will go through something and I'll say, okay, well, that's great. What's next? And I think I'm learning a lot to sort of appreciate the wins, appreciate those little moments where, yeah, this actually means a lot. You've achieved something. Certainly at the top of the range would be becoming a senior advocate of Nigeria. That to me, I think of all the achievements, that's the one I actually really wanted. From the moment that I was called to the Nigerian bar, I knew that I wanted to be a senior advocate. Ranking very close to that would be becoming Attorney General. And maybe in another forum, I'll tell you the story as to how I became. I actually didn't want to, and I almost rejected it, but it turned out to be a very good experience. And one thing I would say is, in terms of how I've distinguished myself, it is something Nania said earlier, so that you'll notice a lot of overarching themes in terms of what we are saying. Is when you get an opportunity, make the absolute most of it. So for me, I recall I did a master's in Queen Mary, and I was being supervised by Maxi Scherer. So I met Maxi, I think a couple of years later in an IBA conference, and she went, we're having a panel discussion in Paris on arbitration in Africa. And based on your dissertation, I think you would be a great fit. And incidentally, I went to a session earlier in the conference where they said, when you're networking, just say yes to everything, right? Particularly when you're young. So I said, yes, I'll go. I didn't know how I was going to fund it. I didn't know what I was going to say. I went and had the panel discussion. And on that panel discussion happened to be Emilio Onyema. So we had another discussion, and Professor Onyema said, well, we're having the SOAS Arbitration in Africa event in Lagos. Would you like to speak at that? And I remember the seminar I went to earlier, and I said, yes, of course, I would love to. So I spoke at that. And in Lagos was Tunde Ogunseyitan, who at the time was ICC counsel for Africa. And Tunde said, oh, I loved your conversation. We're having an event in Nairobi. Would you like to speak? Of course, I said yes. Spoke at that and met Professor Mohammed Abdul Wahab. And eventually he opened the door to me going on the faculty for CIARB's diploma course at Oxford University. But I could only have those opportunities if I was able to demonstrate that I actually do know what I'm saying and I have something to offer. So to you, what I would say is, when you have these opportunities, embrace them, but do not waste them, because they will open more doors for you. And you don't waste it by, number one, demonstrating you are actually good at what you're doing. You understand this field and you have something to offer. So it's a very, I wouldn't say it's easy, but there is a known method of distinguishing yourself. Just ensure that when you have the opportunity, you perform, you are memorable, people will remember you, and they will always give you more opportunities. And I'm sure you would get a similar story if you ask other professionals who are doing relatively well at the moment.
Thank you so much, Isaiah. So, speaking of embracing differences and just being able to step into, like your light, because that's what I'm getting from what Isaiah is telling us. He's basically saying you need to be able to look for opportunities and then maintain the relationships that you pursue. So one of the things that has seemingly come up is the issue of imposter syndrome, right? Nania mentioned it earlier, and I think even the conversation about perspective sort of like circles around back to imposter syndrome. So at the start of our careers as young arbitrators, or even any new journey that any person wants to take, we often feel, a little bit inferior. You're not too sure if you're good. You're not too sure if you're going to make it. You're not sure if you're going to impress people. But then one way or another, people have been able to work around this. So my question to Nania is, at the start of your career, how did you manage to be visible when you were so young and you were just starting out? And how has your strategy for visibility in your work changed throughout? Are you still applying the things you did when you started? Have you learned something new? Are you bringing on new things? I think this would be important for us to learn. Yeah.
Thank you, Cynthia. I mean, I always talk about visibility wherever I go, because that really was a game changer for me in my career. But I want you to understand that being visible, people think that being visible is being out there, being loud, being big. Being visible is just being seen and known for your work. That's all it is. Therefore, when you're starting out as a young practitioner, as a student, your main focus for visibility is performance currency. As a student, you're doing a great job. I mean, Isaiah mentioned writing a thesis and not realizing that doing a good job on that thesis would open a speaking engagement in Paris for him years down the line. So I think the first thing is, whatever your hands find doing, do it well and to the best of your ability. You step out of school, you go and, I don't know how the profession is in Kenya, but you probably have to do a pupillage. Do a great job at pupillage. Whether it's a little legal research assignment you are given, do it well, blow it out of the park. you're giving your first court case, or you're asked to assist on an arbitration, do a great job. And I'll use again Isaiah's example of being asked to write a memo on the arbitration, and he wrote it, and Mrs. Adekoya said, well, go back and look at the damages, and then he won't say it, but I'll say it for him. Because he did a good job, he was asked to come along for the arbitration. If it was completely disastrous, she wouldn't even bother with him. So for performance currency, what you need to learn is that it opens bigger and better opportunities for you. That's the first way of being visible. It's not about being all over the internet. Wherever you are, shine, because it's the people that are there with you that will recommend you to the next big thing. The second thing is relationships and networking. As you are shining in your little corner, you are building relationships so that when you are no longer in focus, they can still remember you. And that's how they're able to present opportunities to you. The third thing, I think, once you start having, building your relationships, think about actually building your profile and having a digital presence. I think one of the easiest way to be visible is to be online, to be on LinkedIn, and that's not, you don't need to spend a lot of money, doing that. And building that profile. Now, remember, you have the performance currency, which means you really have the raw stuff. You have the relationship, which means you have the network and the people to support you. And then you have the presence and the profile. You've built a profile. The next thing is communicating your value. That's where a lot of younger practitioners lose out, because you often think that, what do I know? I'll be seen to be bragging. But remember, if you are talking about something you've done, it's not bragging, it's just telling the facts. Let's be honest. You are just saying that I was involved in this and this is what I did. And so and it's a muscle you have to exercise. And the more you do it, the better you become, the stronger you become. I'm not saying go out there and shout, oh, I'm amazing, I'm fantastic, but I'm saying that you need to communicate it, because if you've been involved in an international arbitration, supporting an arbitrator, and that has never been communicated, no one will know that you've gotten some skills from that. So you learn how to communicate it, and I always say that it's not simply not enough to be a fantastic lawyer if no one knows about you. Be fantastic, but communicate your values so that people can know and remember you. And I also talked about speaking and participating in conferences. Isaiah gave a very great scenario of how he started speaking at conferences. Personally, that I got one tiny speaking opportunity, and then it moved on from there. And I think really one of the surprising things for me was, about a year or so into that, I was invited to speak at the IBA, which is a very big platform. But I think it's just little steps that you have to take. But in everything, I need to say that you need to be fearless. And saying that isn't that you are not afraid, but not being afraid to say yes. A lot of times we deny ourselves the opportunity because we don't find the courage to say yes. And that's something that Isaiah also touched on. Be fearless. And as an older practitioner, let's say as a younger practitioner, these were the things I did. But as an older practitioner, you'll be surprised to know that the way I approach visibility is to be fearless. I still apply that. You'll see a very beautiful painting behind me. What you don't see is what I have in front of me. It's a huge, it's a huge placard on my wall that says "Be fearless," and I have to remind myself every day. It doesn't matter which level you are, there's a higher level. And whenever the higher level is calling, you will be afraid. You'll be tempted to think, I can't do this. You'll be tempted to think, I'm not quite ready. But I look at that every single day and I remind myself, be fearless. And that's my motto. Be fearless. You are young, you are coming up, be fearless. Don't be afraid to fail. And most importantly, don't be afraid to succeed.
What an incredible parting shot from you, Nania. Do what you love, do it well, and don't be afraid to communicate that you've done it well. Amazing. Isaiah, our final question for you has actually been submitted by the incredible Professor Emilia Onyema, who has been mentioned in conversation several times today. An amazing, amazing leader and inspiration to all of us in international arbitration, and particularly as African students and African practitioners. Her question is, what happens if in your seat as an arbitrator, the courts begin to threaten you and make orders that sort of limit your power? What would your advice be to arbitrators who are in that position?
Well, if I knew she was going to ask me these questions, I probably wouldn't have praised her as much as I did. But no, it's an important question, actually. It's one I've actually encountered this year, believe it or not. I wasn't the arbitrator, but I know who the panel was, and I also know who the counsel was. And literally how we had to go through it was to say, okay, firstly, what is the legal basis for the order? You could have a situation where the tribunal makes an injunction, typically against the parties, but not against the tribunal. So from a legal perspective, there isn't anything technically prohibiting the tribunal from proceeding, since they're not parties to the court proceedings. But in this particular case, one of the parties to the proceedings joined the tribunal and the tribunal secretary and obtained an injunctive order. In that case,
Isaiah, I'm so sorry, I apologize. Your microphone again is, we are unable to hear you. So perhaps if you could just mute and unmute. It seemed to work well enough before. I'm hoping that it works now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Perfectly, yes.
Okay, I apologize. I promise you I'm not doing anything to mute myself. Where did you lose me so I know where to continue from?
Again, it was just before you launched into the story. Your last words were, in that case.
No? Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can.
Perfect. What I was saying is, number one, you have to examine the legal basis for the order. You could have a situation where the tribunal will issue an injunction, the courts will issue an injunction against the parties to the arbitration, but not the tribunal. So technically speaking, there is nothing preventing the tribunal from proceeding on that basis. But I've also encountered a situation where the party seeking the injunction will join the tribunal and in fact join the tribunal secretary to the application and obtain injunctive relief. In that circumstance, though you should be mindful of your obligation to proceed diligently, you have to be mindful of your obligation to render an enforceable award. And if you proceed while being injuncted, I guarantee it that the party that obtained the injunction is going to bring a challenge if they lose and say you proceeded contrary to a court order. There are questions as to whether that challenge would be successful, but you want to avoid the possibility of the award being set aside for those reasons. And I can tell you, in the example I encountered, the tribunal decided to pause. More important for me is, what should we as practitioners do within our respective jurisdictions to ensure that these situations do not arise? So in Nigeria, happily, there was a Supreme Court decision this year in proceedings between NMPC and Fung Tai Engineering, where in a slightly different circumstance, the Supreme Court came down very heavily on bad faith applications to frustrate injunctive reliefs. To frustrate arbitral proceedings. And what the Supreme Court said in that case is that the courts should not be scared of coming down really hard on parties that bring these bad faith applications in terms of penalties. And in that particular case, the penalty against the party that brought the bad faith application was 10 million naira. It could be even more. Another thing we're trying to do is in the Arbitration and Mediation Act to have what we call arbitration enforcement rules or arbitration proceedings rules. And what this tends to do is to streamline any court-related application to make it determined within a specific period of time, particularly if it's an interlocutory application, so it doesn't frustrate the substantive arbitration proceedings. But the answer to Professor's question was, if the courts injunct the tribunal, I would be very cautious in proceeding, even though you might have a basis to, simply because in this part of the world, some judges might be very trigger happy and set aside your award. So I hope that answers the question. I'd be very happy to have a longer conversation offline, because I think there are deeper and more important conversations that flow from the question.
Absolutely. I hope Professor Onyema is happy with your response. I certainly am. I'm sure it's a lesson for our students as well. A lot of our discussions around the Moot, revolve around prioritizing the enforcement of the award, and it's something that you've mentioned. As we come to a close of this session, I just wanted to say a massive, massive thank you to Isaiah and Nania for taking the time to chat with us, for being as friendly and hilarious and relatable as you are. Your insights are incredibly valuable, especially for an initiative like ours that is all about boosting African representation in arbitration. Your stories are not just anecdotes to us, they represent hope, they are advice, and they are definitely a roadmap for those of us that are navigating our way into this arena. So thank you very, very much for being a living embodiment of representation and possibility for us. I'm going to go ahead and hand over to Tabitha Joy to close out our session, but thank you. I hope you know that we really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irene, and the team. So you guys have been such great interviewers, and you've done a fantastic job in just guiding this conversation along. On behalf of Nania, for participating in this, you guys, you're referred to as arbitration superstars and duly acknowledged by the Africa Arbitration Academy and, of course, other leading international organizations as leading arbitration practitioners. And I think from today's conversation, some of our young members, students, and Africa in the Moot, all their Mooties can see why that is. So I'd like to thank you for the knowledge shared, the experiences that you have learned, that you've told us about, and your words of wisdom. I think on my part also, I've taken a lot from you guys, and it's always such a pleasure to hear you guys provide advice on your career journey. And indeed, also just personal development, which is useful to any legal practitioner. And our collaborators, we have Abayomi and the Africa Arbitration Academy. Thank you so much for the introduction that was provided earlier today. And also to thank Erin and the Africa in the Moot team and everybody that's working in the background with Erin. And also to thank our host for today's conversation. And that is so thank you, Arbitration Channel, for making it possible for us to meet today. I think the best thing about this is that this conversation is recorded and available on YouTube. So you can share with your networks or refer to the video at any point that you would choose to do so. I think on that note, and so that we can finish promptly, let me just proceed to end this conversation. Again, thank you so much to the students from Strathmore University Law School. We also need to recognize that Strathmore is supporting you through the VIS, Moot, and even giving you the time to even be here today. Please do follow the AFAS page that was stated by Eunice earlier on. As she pointed out, to a series of conversations that we plan to hold in collaboration with the Academy and Africa in the Moot. And lastly, do have yourselves a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you so much.